Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nick Powell, the Chief Executive of the Society of Occupational Medicine. Welcome to this 2-hour webinar on return to work following the COVID-19 lockdown. Now, this webinar has been hosted in conjunction with the Vocational Rehabilitation Association, the British Psychological Society Division of Occupational Psychology as well. A recording of the webinar will be circulated to registrants afterwards. You also get CPD certificates sent to all participants who have logged in with a name, and you can also complete a survey monkey to leave feedback. One thing to highlight is that questions will be after all the speakers have completed, although maybe we'll have 1 or 2 quick questions that might come in for each speaker. Clearly, return to work is the issue of the moment, and we have some return to work toolkits, both for health professionals and also with partners such as ACAS, CIPD, Mind, and Business in the Community. We have a toolkit for general return to work. The Vocational Rehabilitation Association also have a toolkit that's primarily for rehabilitation case managers, and there's also an excellent British Psychological Society guidance paper considering psychological needs for people recovering from COVID. So do look at those resources, and they'll be on the website listed on the last slide. So I've just been a number of return to work webinars. There's one hosted by the Bevan Commission that had over 500 participants, and they've got another one that's coming up next week on the 1st of June in the afternoon, which you're welcome to join. But this one is going to look a little bit deeper, wider, a little bit beyond. I'm very pleased to have 3 excellent speakers, Professor Kim Burton, Dr. Jo Yarker, and Dr. Roxane Gervais, talking through the different aspects to return to work, for example, from a psychological perspective. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Professor Kim Burton with his presentation. Professor Kim Burton from the University of Huddersfield, and written widely on return to work, particularly from a biopsychosocial viewpoint, and was very helpful in guidance and helping us with that return to work toolkit I mentioned from Tom. So over to you, Kim. Thanks very
much. Thank you, Nick. Morning, people. It's a pleasure to be here, and a word of thanks to our sponsors before we bash straight in. What I'm going to do in this first session is do a little bit of scene setting. I'd like to just pull in some biopsychosocial principles and then have a look at some practical applications. I'm going to be focusing around principles mainly. And I'm also going to focus on the role of the workplace and their role in providing us with good jobs and supportive workplaces. And also, the workplace is the place that makes it happen. Let's just have a little think about the post-lockdown context. Supporting people back to work isn't just about the economy. We know there are substantial personal and social benefits to people working. But, and it's quite a big but, those benefits come from good jobs, jobs that are safe and acceptable. And whether we like it or not, the COVID-19 experience is going to reshape the nature of work. Workplaces are just going to look and feel very different as we go through this phase. And if we're going to maintain workability as well as maintain safety, we're going to have to ensure that the altered jobs are indeed good jobs. And actually, it's more than return to work, I think. We've got some people, actually, a lot of people, have continued working. Some have been doing it in their usual job, in their usual workplace, such as refuse collectors. Others have been working at an altered job, possibly in an altered workplace, people working from home. Some people have a job, they're just not working right now, the furloughed people. And of course, some people have lost their job altogether. And these different contexts are going to require different challenges. For instance, those working from home, their challenge is going to be returning to the workplace, if indeed they return to the workplace, and that's not certain for some of them. For those who have been not working, the challenge is actually returning to doing some work. And for those who have continued working, The challenge is, and probably has been for a while, increased struggling under the circumstances. So helping millions of people to return to work is certainly important, but actually helping those people stay in work under strange circumstances is going to be just as important. And these new circumstances are going to give us new needs. The return to the workplace, for instance, requires actions to support groups of workers, whereas return to work involves actions to support individual workers. And then there's the issue around staying at work, maintaining workability. That's more than just about safety. And achieving sustained return to work, maintaining that workability, is going to be a big challenge, and it's going to need what we might call smart OH support. Usual OH activities of risk assessments, fitness for work assessments, filing reports and the such like are absolutely necessary, but they're not going to be sufficient. So what do I mean by smart OH support? I'm thinking about flexibility, imaginative solutions, responsiveness, and the ability to be adaptive, to be able to address new and existing employee needs in a changing environment. Controlling infection risk alongside supporting physical and mental health is going to be crucial. So effective OH support requires close communication with and actions by management and HR, obviously. But there's a lot of workers without professional OH support, and they're going to have to rely on somebody, probably their line managers, having the right sort of understanding, skills and tools. I just want to step sideways or backwards really, and just think about what's been going on for some while, say the last 40, 50 years, whatever. We've got this strange paradox that we've had more and more clinical guidelines, we've had more and better workplace regulation, but work disability has increased over that time. So whatever we were doing wasn't working as well as it should. And in fact, most work disability and most sickness absence comes from or starts with a common health problem. Musculoskeletal conditions, common mental health problems. I don't see any reason to think that that's going to change post-COVID. So we're still going to have people who are going to struggle to maintain workability with the common health problems they used to have before. But these are essentially typical people with a manageable health problem. And given the right support and opportunities and encouragement, they should be able to work. So much work disability should be avoidable. But we're stuck in a situation where we've got social constructs and separated systems that lead to obstacles to recovery and essentially a slide to disaster. Before a health problem arises, we're a person. At the onset of the health problem, we're still a person. At the time we seek healthcare, we become a patient. And that's a label, and it carries excess baggage with it. We feel differently about ourselves, people treat us differently. If we're then signed off work, we become a beneficiary. Again, a label. But it also means that we think about ourselves differently, we think about the future differently, and people treat us differently. If we then fail to recover and fail to participate again, we become dispossessed. It's a potential disaster. Now that's very stylized, but actually it's not an uncommon situation. And why it's important is because as we go through that particular slide to disaster, the longer we're away from work, the more our workability declines and work disability becomes unavoidable. Now, I keep littering the phrase workability in here, and Roxane is going to talk about that in more detail later on. So why is it that some people struggle to maintain their workability? It's not that they've got a more serious health condition or a more severe injury. It's not about what's happened to them. It's about why they don't recover as we might reasonably expect them to do so. And why is that? It's because they face obstacles. This is one way of looking at it. Face obstacles to recovery and obstacles to participation. And that leads me into thinking we should be using a biopsychosocial approach. And I'm not going to go through this in detail. You all are aware of the biopsychosocial model of disability, but essentially we're talking about a health problem that exists in a person who has a psychology, and that person exists in a context, a culture of systems and workplace. And the important bit is the way that illness and injury affects us and how we respond depends on who we are, the work we're doing, and the culture we live in. And the biopsychosocial model provides us with a framework for understanding obstacles and their relationship to work participation. Identifying and tackling obstacles helps us to address workability. Now, I just want to put in front of you the concept of work-relevant symptoms. Now, if we just look at the bar chart, the bars for a moment, we all have no symptoms some of the time, but actually most people quite a lot of the time have some sort of symptoms. They don't all go to see their GP, and they don't all take absence. And not all of those who do end up with work disability. So the proportion ending up with work disability may be small, but the numbers are huge. Now, I've deliberately left out the green bar there, which is work relevant symptoms. Basically, work relevance is about how the symptoms or how the health problem relates to work. People with certain job demands may not notice their symptoms at work, therefore they're not work relevant. People with another set of job demands may struggle with their work relevant symptoms. Usual work is becoming difficult or impossible. A work relevance is about this person in this job with these symptoms at this time. They may have managed with a previous episode of back pain, but this time they're not doing. They may need accommodation, and Jo's going to talk to us about accommodation later on, so I'm not going to spend a great deal of time on that. There is a concept lying around here, and that is the idea of recovering while working, as opposed to recover then work. Now, there are a number of different people involved in the health-work interface, and I know Jo's going to talk about this also in more detail later on, but we've got the person who's got some sort of contact with the workplace, if they're lucky. They've got some sort of contact with healthcare, again, if they're lucky. Either of those two systems can either help or sabotage the situation, but those two systems don't talk to each other very much at all. So the person's left looking at a bit of a maze and will need some help to navigate that maze. And return to work, in terms of vocational rehabilitation, doesn't just happen. Healthcare alone isn't enough. The workplace has to be involved. And the review that we did suggested that work-focused healthcare and a supportive workplace are needed. Both are necessary, and actually both should start at day one of absence, or actually, I'd argue before that. So what does a supportive workplace mean? What does it look like? Well, the logic is really that the worker reports some work-relevant symptoms, and then there's a proportional stepped approach, which may depend on the extent of struggling. We need to assess their workability and identifying psychosocial obstacles to working, and then agree a plan of action, which may or may not involve temporary job alteration. There may be a need for some risk assessments, and I think Roxane's going to talk about that a little bit later on. There may be a need to refer for medical opinion and OH, it may not. If there is absence, the important thing then is to agree a return to work plan, then implement that plan, which may or may not involve changing jobs. Now, it's all very well saying that, I guess, but the scale of need and professional resources available aren't matching. We've got a situation where we've got existing workers, we've got returning workers, and we may well have some new workers. We've got workers with existing health problems, some with new health problems. We're going to have workers with post-COVID difficulties, some of whom are going to need rehab before they can consider coming back into the workplace. In a sense, it's much like normal, just that there are more issues there. And one of the things that's just intrigued me, and I'm not going to delve into it deeply, but I'm just wondering what's happened to all the people who, the hundreds of thousands of appointments with the GP, the dentist, the optician, and the physio that haven't been happening. I'm not sure quite what to make of that, but it's something that we need to bear in mind, that there has been and probably will be for a while reduced healthcare availability. All these workers, whether they're existing workers or returning workers, are going to need support to maintain their workability. Some of them, as we said, have got OH and VR support, but actually over half of employees do not. And even with professional OH and VR support, the workplace input is essential. So we really need the line managers. What do we need line managers to do? The answer is a lot. We want them to use a biopsychosocial approach, recognizing when their colleague is struggling, responding to the person who's struggling, evaluate their workability, identify any obstacles to return to work and staying at work, manage those obstacles, arrange reasonable temporary job modifications, and then help people build up gradually to their usual job. The line manager has something of a predicament. They're uncertain. They're uncertain about health generally, and certainly going to be uncertain about COVID. They're uncertain about what's safe, about what the law has to say, about what they can do, about what the fit note means. For instance, they're bereft of confidence and knowledge. They're going to need a lot of help. Now, they often get mixed messages, which isn't at all helpful. But fortunately, there are some evidence-based help available, bits of evidence-based help available. I'll just point you to these two leaflets published by the Stationery Office, which were developed for DWP a few years ago. They're available as free PDFs. They're 6 pages. They've been evaluated out in the field, and they basically just give consistently good messages about work and health. And now there's some additional support online that I'd like to introduce you to. A few years ago, Health and Safety Executive commissioned a project to look at, to develop the health work toolbox. That project developed a lot of principles as well as tools, and it tried to bring together the two key issues of good jobs and a supportive workplace, linked into a biopsychosocial approach. The toolbox is essentially a web-based hub to empower the workplace to tackle avoidable work disability. Now, actually, the original brief from HSE didn't include developing a web-based hub. Nevertheless, we went ahead and did it anyway. And we built up a matrix of information and tools around this key idea of providing a baseline of knowledge about health and work. And then alongside that, the idea of developing good jobs. And alongside that, the idea of making the workplace supportive for health. And we produce this in a layered content, which allows SMEs, for instance, to quickly go in, get a grip onto what they need to get a grip on, and that will be sufficient for them. The corporates with all sorts of personnel to go into things in more detail can delve down into the detail here and get more out of it. The idea was also that it supports OH and VR as well as the line managers. It forms a link between the professionals and the line managers. And importantly, or at least we thought it was important at the time, it's very accessible. The language is accessible, and it doesn't look like official guidance. It's not frightening. So what does it do? It transfers knowledge. That's an essential component. It's that way of getting some sort of confidence into the line managers in general. The knowledge about work and health matches what's in those leaflets I was mentioning a moment ago. It's this idea of understanding, giving competence, myth-busting, signposting and tools. And it conveys principles that people can work to within the workplace. The idea that good jobs is an aspirational goal, and sort of identifying what good jobs are, and importantly, telling managers how they can achieve good jobs. And I'm going to leave it at that for the moment because I know Roxane's going to talk about good jobs later on. And then there's the principles around a supportive workplace, the idea of working while recovering, or recovering while working, whichever way around you want it. To take early action, recognizing the struggling workers, identifying those obstacles to workability, and then agreeing a plan to overcome the obstacles. And as I say, Jo's going to talk about job modifications later on. The toolbox also, of course, provides tools, lots of them, all quite carefully worked out, and they're essentially there to enable managers to follow the principles and do things. Now then, if you want to access the toolbox, you now can, if you haven't been able to for quite a long time, for all manner of different reasons, but it's currently hosted by University of Huddersfield, and if you've got something to scribble with, you could write down that fairly simple URL, healthworktoolbox.com. You'll need a password, and that's Good Work 2020. It's a work in progress, so if you're interested, let us know what you think, please. Now, I just want to say a little word about case management, because that also is going to change. It's going to be an important part of managing the return to work process. And whilst it can be done by professionals, it can also be done within the workplace. We'll come back to that. But it's going to have to be remote, certainly for the foreseeable future. And you're going to say, well, does remote case management work? DWP asked us to have a look at telephonic support to facilitate return to work. And the evidence base is actually quite robust. Telephonic support does save time, money and resources. It does assess needs and help decision making. It can deliver additional information and advice. And the core aspect, of course, is support and coordination of care. And it will facilitate early return to work. But there's a big if. There's always an if with these things. If it's delivered competently and to the right conceptual framework. It's about bringing principles together with process. So a common set of evidence-based principles is that work is an important health outcome, that physical and mental symptoms are common, treatment isn't always needed, and most people can stay at work. However, we've got to be able to recognise that some people will struggle and they may well need absence. If they do, early return to work is beneficial. And the process of achieving that is through accurate, consistent information and advice, provision of good jobs, and using step care principles to deliver work-focused healthcare without over-medicalising. Workplace action is hugely important, and probably the return to work plan, if done properly, is the single most effective element, with its temporary job modifications. Those processes, if they're going to work, have to have high fidelity to the principles, and that requires competent providers and coordination between workplace healthcare and society. So getting the evidence across is always a challenge. And the guidance from SOB, VRA and BPS is a great start. Now we just need to get all the players on side, believing the same things, having shared goals and acting together. On that, I'll hand over to Jo, if I may. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. And it's wonderful to listen to so many of the shared principles. I think the idea of ensuring that we try and prevent work disability is important to us all. And now at a time when so many people are returning to work gradually over the coming months, it's important that we get these landed and get these right. And I think the only way we can do that is by bringing multiple disciplinary approaches and multiple perspectives to the fore. So I'm delighted to share some of the work that we've been doing. On the next slide that I have, this picture really shares a common view of what we hear through our research when we are talking to employees and talking to managers when it comes to return to work. And I'm sure many of you working in this area will feel that this is a common representation. I think with return to work, we've had the privilege of interviewing and speaking to many people that are involved in the process and across their journey of that transition from absence to return. And it's always, I think, such a shame to hear people struggling on their own. And so a lot of our work has been trying to unpick what is it that people are experiencing, how can we translate that into practical solutions that help them articulate how they're feeling and what they need. And so ultimately to try and prevent this situation that you see on this slide where an employee is at home having this mixed emotions, not quite sure of how they're feeling, not quite sure what the implications are for their job, but also from the manager's perspective, not really understanding what the employee is going through, but also not recognizing what that means for their role. So sometimes when somebody is not feeling very well, it can be misconstrued as somebody not really caring about their job, that they're disengaged, that they're maybe looking for a new job. And so how do we try and combine these perspectives so that everyone has a clear understanding of what's going on? And those basic principles that Kim was just talking through are absolutely vital in helping us do that. So I wanted to share, building on Kim's presentation, some specifics around implications for people who have had COVID-19, implications for people who are returning following mental ill health. And then I'm going to share some early findings from a study that we've been looking at around work adjustments and what are used and what are effective and where we might look to help embed these work adjustments and work accommodations in a more effective way. And then I'm going to share a piece of research that I've been working with in collaboration with the University of Sheffield to look at how we help to keep people at work once they've returned and what resources they need to do that. So first of all, looking at the return to work implications for people who have had COVID-19, obviously the findings are only emerging in terms of what individuals need and the experiences that they're going through. But I think one of the things that has been certain is that there is such a diverse impact of the disease on individuals. So some people are asymptomatic, some have very mild reactions, some have moderate, and some have acute experiences. And so in supporting their return to work journey, we need to be very mindful that we need to explore with them what the impact has been for them of that disease. And so the guidance suggests that people can return after 7 days of the onset, and if the symptoms have gone or they only have a slight symptoms that remain, but they must keep self-isolating if other symptoms such as the high temperature, runny nose, vomiting or diarrhea have not settled. So that gives us an indication of who can return and when they can return. But I think more complex that we need to keep in mind is this potentially very long-term experience of the post-viral symptoms and the impact that has on workability. So Kim mentioned the work-relevant nature of the impact on work, and I think that for different jobs will have different implications, but the symptoms that are commonly discussed in relation to COVID-19 are fatigue, so this feeling of extreme exhaustion, not being able to muster despite having had rest and despite having had sleep, not being able to muster the energy to get on with day-to-day tasks. The psychological impact that has been associated with the fear of how the virus will progress, whether symptoms are going to progress, and many people have reported this ebbing and flowing of symptoms that make it very difficult to understand whether you're getting better or perhaps are deteriorating. And the psychological impact of that is thought to be significant. Obviously, then there are the other elements that come in relation to those that have been hospitalised and those that have entered ICU. So we need to be mindful that people will be in very different state and mindsets as they're returning and engaging in work. We also see that for those people who have experienced moderate and acute symptoms, there have been implications for musculoskeletal health. So for those people who have been hospitalised and particularly those in ICU, musculoskeletal deterioration, the need for physiotherapy, but even those with more mild symptoms have reported that they've been unable to take part in their day-to-day routines of getting up and walking around, walking to the end of the road, and therefore it will take time to build up strength as they recover their health. And so those symptoms will need to be considered in relation to what can be achieved at work, and therefore it's likely that people will need work adjustments and ongoing support, but also that those work adjustments will be individualised because the symptoms are so varied, and both in their nature and in their severity. When we look at the return to work implications for people who experience mental ill health, we obviously know a lot more about the evidence there is quite strong in terms of the variations of experiences in return. And we know that pre-COVID-19, it was a big issue. We really need to embed more practices to support people in their return following mental health. So if we look at some of the statistics, 1 in 4 workers are affected by stress, depression and anxiety, but 1 in 3 fit notes cite mental ill health. So that means that 1 in 3 people going to their GP to be signed off work report mental ill health as their prevailing condition. And so that is an issue that line managers are having to deal with regularly, and organisations are having to deal with it regularly. So the more that we can do to support those people supporting the employees, the better, to help them get back into work. We also know that 74% of people suggested that they felt so stressed, they've been so overwhelmed by their work that they felt stressed. And so this is all pre-COVID-19. And the workplace, our lives have changed so considerably over the last few months. We have, on top of that day-to-day experience, we have the fear that many experience in relation to the coronavirus infection itself, the fear and uncertainty of changed workplaces and ways of working, and also this toll of lockdown that is creating for many isolation. Many have experienced bereavement. Those people who've been furloughed, uncertain of what the future holds for them, increasingly hearing of people being made redundant, but also those that are at home with childcare responsibilities, trying to juggle work and childcare or elder care. And so this toll is building on top of what was already a concerning picture. And therefore we need to be extra compassionate when we're thinking about how we manage this when we're supporting people returning hereafter. I think a really important note to flag, and Kim noted the importance of line managers, and as we move through my presentation I'll also share that, but the BITC report noted that 8% of managers reported that they'd received training on adjustments and rehabilitation in a study of mental health in the workplace. And I think that that's really important to bear in mind given the current situation. So if line managers are vital in getting our employees back to work safely and productively and healthily, we really need to support those that are in the position to support them. So line managers' role becomes very important here. So what work adjustments are used? I'm very aware that we have a diverse audience listening, and some of you, this will be the day-to-day components of your work, thinking about what work adjustments might be appropriate and discussing those with your clients and putting them into place, but others may not be so familiar. We were commissioned by ACAS to look at and review work adjustments used for mental health and the evidence that underpins those. And that report is coming out early next month. But in terms of what we found when we looked at the literature in terms of the evidence for work adjustments, what we found was there is a broad spectrum of different adjustments that are put in place for employees. So we see adjustments that are related to the work schedule, so people having perhaps more frequent breaks or leave for appointments, paid leave for appointments, or enabling flexible hours. We also see that people have adjustments in relation to the role and responsibilities that they take on. So perhaps some people coming back to a review of their workload, reduced load, or a temporary change in duties so that perhaps the cognitive load is not quite so strong in those first early days of returning, and possibly weeks returning. There are also adjustments to the physical work environment, so individuals being able to work at home, which obviously for many of us that is the current state of affairs, but that also brings a new thing that we need to think about is if people are being returned to a remote environment, we need to support them in a slightly different way. But thinking about how we enable people who are returning following mental health to relocate their desk space to somewhere that enables them to concentrate. And so if we're thinking about employees returning to work following absence in their home environment, which may be very distracted, we'll have to have an extra conversation there around how we can help support them in enabling their concentration. We may see policy changes through the work that we've been doing, speaking to people not only with mental health concerns but also other illnesses, is absence management policies can be very rigid and understandably so in many instances. But this places an extra pressure on those individuals that have fluctuating conditions, and therefore they may be more likely to stay at work, and there will be presenteeism, so they're at work when really they should be at home, simply because they're concerned that if they take that day and they go home, which perhaps will have prevented them from deteriorating in their health, they stay at work because they're concerned that it will have an impact on their absence record and therefore lead to disciplinaries. We also see adjustments in relation to additional support and assistance, so people being provided with buddies or mentors, having additional supervision, and then those additional training on skills and duties that are specific to the role that the individual is concerned about. And then to a lesser extent, there's evidence that looks at redeployment. Redeployment to a different role, a different department, or a different location, so that the individual can flex stay within the organisational community, but work within a role that is specifically adjusted to their needs. Looking at the evidence, what we saw was there's a lot going on, and certainly from a practitioner point of view, recommendations are made quite broadly and are seen to be helpful for the employee and sustain their return. Looking at the evidence, we really need to have a better understanding of the long-term impact of these adjustments on return to work and workability outcomes. So we know what people use and what they prefer to use, but longitudinal research which tracks the individual over time and their work sustainability is less available to us, and that's something we really need to build upon, because this will help us make better decisions. And so in relation to work adjustments, we'd really encourage this need for practitioner-led research so that people that are working on the front line are then able to feed in the return to work outcomes that they see day to day in their work. Within the literature, what we found was that there were a number of barriers and facilitators to the return to work outcomes. So those individuals that had work adjustments that were multi-component interventions, so where they had therapeutic adjustments as well as adjustments in the workplace, these individuals were more likely to return and stay at work. We also found that disclosure was important. So when employees disclosed their condition, or more specifically disclosed what it meant for their work, this was really important and helped them access those work adjustments. As common sense would suggest, we found that supervisor support was absolutely vital. Those that were supported by their employer, but also those that felt that their employer would be supported were more likely to ask for adjustments and seek those adjustments on their return. Co-worker support was important, so those people who felt supported and enabled by their co-workers to work in a more flexible way was definitely an important point. And interestingly, we found that co-workers see flexible hours and time off for counselling as more acceptable than frequent breaks. And so if this is the case, but your individual that you're working with needs the flexible breaks rather than the time off for counselling, we perhaps need to do more around explaining what the rationale behind that is to enable us to get that co-worker support. We also found an interesting difference in the literature around HR and employers seem to focus on work aspects, so the job modifications that are made, while the employees certainly focus on the relational aspects of adjustment, so the support and the good relationships that help them get back to work. And so again, as those of us that are involved in policy and supporting organisations through this process, we can be mindful that actually for the employees, the focus on those relationships is absolutely vital in supporting them back into the workplace. And then just to reiterate, it's the multi-component aspect that seems to be most effective. And that means that we can't just offer one type of adjustment to help that individual get back. It really does need a holistic view so that we're supporting that individual as they return and on an ongoing basis. So the other piece of work I wanted to share with you was some research that we've been conducting with Professor Nielsen at the University of Sheffield that looks at the IGLOo. And so Kim mentioned the importance of translating all this evidence into really practical guidance so that employees and managers and organisations can take specific and meaningful steps to help individuals return. I think what we've seen is the work that we've done here is certainly translatable into supporting all individuals back, regardless of whether it's for mental health or for other conditions such as cancer, COVID-19, or just informing basic principles of return to work and supplementing those that were discussed earlier. So this work is formed on the basis of a conceptual paper that we wrote that aimed to bring together different perspectives on supporting the individual through their return to work journey. And what we'd seen in the literature was that there is a lot of evidence that suggests the things that are important for the first part of the return. So what do we need to do to get somebody back to work? We need to communicate with them while they're absent. We need to communicate on their first day. We need the line manager to be available to support that individual on the first day. But less was known about what we need to do in the long term to keep people at work and ensure that they can work and sustain work in the longer term. And so this piece of work was drawing from the framework that we used, which was based on the conservation of resources, which suggests that we need lots of different resources to be able to cope with the challenges and the demands that we face. And here we built an IGLOo. So we have individual resources, group resources from our team and our family, leader resources from our line manager or our GP, the person that's the link to other resources that we might have available. And then the organisational resources, such as policies and practices. And we interviewed over time 38 employees and 20 line managers. And we were interested to understand what resources did people draw from and how did these change over time so that we could see what were the key resources that really sustained people in the long term on their return. And our findings were at five levels. So our individuals found that those that returned successfully and stayed at work, they believed that they were going to have support. They believed that the organisation and their line manager wanted to support them, and they wanted to get back to work. They also used job crafting on their return so that they were more able to identify those pieces of work and those tasks that they felt confident in doing, and took proactive behaviours to put themselves in a position where they were doing work that was in their area of strength and confidence. They were also very motivated to return, but also felt very guilty about asking their return for adjustments. One thing that we found very interesting was that individuals who stayed at work also mentioned quite frequently this idea of using their voice. So having gone through the experience of return, they really wanted to support others and raise awareness of the importance of a good return process, but also in managing individual boundaries and mental health. At the group level, we found that employees really relied on their team and support from others within the organisation to support them through that return. So where they had good relationships, they were much more likely to return. Knowing that their colleagues were there to help, and where colleagues gave specific advice and stepped in when challenging tasks were being undertaken. So they would step in to say, you know, I know this is a big report, is there anything that I can do to help you here? Or I can hear you on the phone to a challenging client, would you like me to step in? So knowing that colleagues were there and they had those group resources was absolutely vital in sustaining their return. At the line manager level, we saw the good relationships were again key, and this is borne out in a lot of literature. Where line managers were available and listened, so not just, oh, it'll be good to see you, let me know if you have any problems as you return, but checking in, actively listening, and not necessarily knowing the answers to all of their questions, but certainly providing access to other support. If they didn't know where to find something, they would take that accountability and find out where the employee could get the support from. One of the things that those people who stayed at work and stayed successfully and productively at work differed was that they had continued support and adjustments over time. So there was an ebb and flow of tasks that changed, of check-ins, and a realization that it was very much a journey rather than a one-off event where somebody returned. At the organisational level, we saw that wellbeing services, including access to CBT, was very useful. Work-focused counselling was mentioned as well. So often within a therapeutic environment, there's only time to talk about the therapy rather than discuss work issues, where individuals were accessing work-focused counselling to talk specifically about how they may address some of the work challenges. They reported this was very helpful to them. And then from an HRM practice point of view, having individualised plans, flexible work, a phased return, and ability-enhancing practices were seen as very useful by the group that we interviewed. And then from an outside context, we're also very aware, and particularly in the context of COVID-19, I think this will be really relevant, where we can see that there are variations in the social and healthcare context that we're working in. And so for those that are in global organisations where we can see those differences quite acutely, I think, at the moment, it'll be interesting to see how we can support individuals within that wider system as well. Because when we're drawing from the research, certainly we can see variations in the way that individuals experience that return due to the connections that they have both in social and healthcare. And so the implications for productivity and well-being are that we really need a whole systems approach to consider the resources at all of these levels, and not only in the workplace. I know I've talked about the workplace, but we also need to consider the resources an individual has at home. And so if you know that your employee or your colleague doesn't necessarily have that support at home, the workplace takes even more of a pivotal role. And so at the individual, we need to make sure that we're encouraging the returning employee to consider the resources and their needs. How can they look after their own health and well-being, and what do they need to happen to ensure that's done? How can team and colleagues support, and how do we facilitate that open discussion? how do we equip line managers with the knowledge and skills and confidence to support their returning employees? And then at an organisational level, we need to focus on prevention and also compassionate policies that allow for that flexibility when an individual is in a very vulnerable position, that they know that that policy doesn't necessarily hinder their return as they move forward. And we need to do this in a flexible way, in an individualised way, and for the long term. So those people who returned successfully still mentioned that they had a number of ups and downs, and that they were keen for adjustments to go on to enable them to stay in work. So the more that we can do to facilitate that individual and flexible approach is likely to sustain individuals' workability. And then on this final slide, you can see an example of the guidance that we've created, but one of the things that we can see in a lot of guidance is that it's information giving as opposed to behaviour changing. And so the guidance that we've created has aimed to encourage individuals to think creatively about how they can change their behaviour and access the resources that they need. And so by all means, download that and use that if you find it a useful framework. But the idea is that it encourages every part of the process, whether you're the individual or the group or the line manager or the HR occupational health professional within the process, to think about your role in supporting the employee on their return to work journey, rather than the employee feeling that they're on their own and need to do the return on their own. So thank you ever so much for your time, and I look forward to questions at the end. I'll now hand over to Roxane.
Yes, good afternoon everyone. Thank you for coming along today. I'll be going through a few of the areas that Kim and Jo mentioned, and just to get you up to speed of what else that organisations and individuals could be looking at in supporting their return to work. So again, as Nick mentioned, this is jointly sponsored by the Division of Occupational Psychology, which is part of the British Psychological Society. And in this session, I'll be exploring a bit on workers' mental well-being and some of the ways that organisations can support them. I'll cover the current experience of feeling overwhelmed, versus mental ill health, maintaining workability, and supporting workers' return to work. So, quite a lot of us might be feeling a bit overwhelmed at present. COVID-19 has more or less produced perfect storm where everything seems to have happened at once, and we're having to cope with many different things. You know, we homeschooling our children. We're working from home, as Jo mentioned, might be working with, you know, a partner, a relative. So there might be a lot going on within the home environment. And for those of us who are not working from home, we've got quite a lot of other challenges in how to get to work, how to get back home, how to get to work safely. And so there are quite a lot of areas that probably is affecting us quite extensively right now. Why do we feel overwhelmed? It's a matter of control. Can we control what's happening in our lives? And at present, a lot of people don't feel that they have that level of control because they have to keep responding, they have to keep reacting, rather than trying to figure out how to do it a lot better. There are a lot of challenges in balancing the work-life interface. Now, again, because of COVID-19, a lot of things have happened at once. So we might find it difficult. We might have to find a different way to manage the weekday, as well as manage the homeschooling of children if we have children to homeschool. So some people might start getting up a little bit earlier to get the work done, then have time to actually, you know, help their children with what's happening within their school life. Some might then have to work throughout the day with their children or act as carers for various parts of their relatives or neighbours, and then work late in the day. So it's a matter of how best to manage this. Are we coping well with different situations at present? A lot of us probably will be doing so. A lot of us probably will not be doing so. maybe feeling helpless and not seeing a way forward out of this situation at present. Now, because of all these different experiences that we're having, because we're feeling so overwhelmed, we might be feeling numb, agitated, shocked, or shocked. We might be withdrawing from interacting with work colleagues, family, and friends. Some of us, unfortunately, might have suicidal thoughts, and some of us might also resort to self-harm. Now, this is not the norm, but it is possible reactions because, we've all been respecting, protect the NHS. So some of us might, even though we're feeling a bit overwhelmed and very trying to deal with everything, we might not want to, get into call 111 or call our GPs or call our health practices, because we have to think about those who are actually physically ill. So the mental part of it, we might want to just, shelf it a bit and think we'll get through this. But it might be useful to actually decide how best can I support myself. Even though we're thinking about protecting the NHS, and we should be doing so, we also have to think about managing our own sense of self then. So we could focus on talking to a trusted friend or relative. Again, contact your GP. That's what they're there for. They are willing to help you. Contact a voluntary support system like Samaritans, Most of our employee assistance programs, if they are in place, are probably still functioning. So if we're being a bit overwhelmed by what's been happening over the last 2 to 3 months, we should consider, getting in touch with them and saying, can I make an appointment? Can I talk to someone? How can I get the support that I need? And if it gets really drastic, we can decide to go to our emergency department. And again, that's what it's there for. And again, we do have to be cognizant of not trying to make it a lot more challenging for the NHS, but we also have to think about, we are also suffering as well, and we have to, decide what we can do. It's also essential that we take it one day at a time. We need to slow down. And because of the hectic nature of the past 2 months, that is a bit challenging, because we've had to respond quite quickly to changes in our work practices or work patterns. How we commute to work, so rather than driving 30, 40 miles, we now have to go from one room to the next. And that might be acceptable to some individuals, but some people might take the commute into work to actually plan their work day, decide how they're going to do things differently, what they're going to focus on. But because everything has changed, you might not have that time to actually reflect on how best to manage the working day. So we now have to take that time to figure out, okay, what should I be doing? And also we need to focus on ourselves. It does not have to be a rush. We can slow down, we can reassess, we can reevaluate how best to get something done. And we can also use this time to decide, is the distress we're feeling, some sort of sign to change some part of our lives? And again, COVID has given us that perfect opportunity. Is there some part of your job you're thinking, I don't need to do this once the lockdown ends, I need to be doing something differently? This isn't working in my life, I need to change it. So it could be a sort of reason for us to actually think about what's working in our lives and what's not working, and what do we need to do to actually move forward and change the things in our lives that are not working. So one of the ways that has been recommended in dealing with being overwhelmed is to make a safety plan. So what do we need to include in that? Now, this is for you to decide what needs to go into it. So it can include anything such as things that you enjoy, going for a walk, looking after a pet, looking after a friend's pet. And over the past few months, the dogs in households have been very ecstatic because they've been walked more than once per day, more than twice per day, because they actually get a lot more exercise. People are taking them out. But one to think about, including the support of family and friends who we know we can count on to actually provide some support to us. Remind of the people and things we love, because we all have a purpose in life. Even though we get a bit tense, a bit anxious, we feel a bit overwhelmed, we do have a support system around us. And some of us might not see the support system until things get really drastic, but that support system is always around us. And how to access professional support. What do we need to do? Do we need to call the GP? Do we need to go to the emergency room? We need to get the help if we need. How to access voluntary support organizations. Do you have a contact number on hand for, again, the Samaritans? And things to do if your suicidal thoughts are getting stronger, if you can't ignore them. Again, get to the emergency room, call your GP. And it's recommended to keep this in a safe place. It's easy for you or anyone else that you care about, that cares about you, to access it so they can see it. Look at what the things that you value in your life, the things that actually support you in your life, and focus on those things. And the things that are causing you to become overwhelmed will eventually sort themselves out, because nothing carries on indefinitely. Things eventually come to an end, and you will manage to deal with all these issues that are making you a bit tense and anxious. Now, as we're feeling overwhelmed, there's a part of feeling mentally not right, but it's not quite mental ill health, because being overwhelmed is usually short in nature. It is a transition from going from one calm situation to a very hectic situation until we can manage to get it back to a calm situation. Mental ill health is more of a long-lasting condition that happens to us, that we actually need a lot more support to manage, because we can try to manage it ourselves, but it's usually a lot easier for us if we actually get the support that we need to actually manage the ill health. And of course, there's always a stigma attached to ill health that's still relevant right now. So we can look at our physical illnesses, and we talk to them. We talk about the symptoms of the COVID-19. This is a symptom, that is a symptom. But we really do not talk about the symptoms of the mental health issues that we're struggling with, because it's hard to admit that we do have a mental health condition, because if you're mentally ill, there's something wrong with you. Well, there's nothing wrong with you. You just need more support in actually managing the anxieties that we're coping with on a daily basis, and those work stresses that we're coping with. And we also have to distinguish between mental ill health that's caused by work conditions, and mental ill health that we can develop outside of the work environment. And these are usually termed as mental disorders, and they can include schizophrenia, depression, intellectual disabilities, and disorders due to drug abuse. And again, these are not permanent conditions. They can all be successfully treated. So even if someone has one of these mental disorders, they can still function within the work environment. There's nothing stopping them from functioning, because they will get the treatment they need, and they will be able to function quite effectively. And then we have to think about the WHO's definition of what they consider mental health. And again, we have to distinguish between mental health, which is a state of well-being that allows us to cope effectively with life, and mental ill health. So everyone within society has some element of mental health, and that's the positive aspect. But they become ill when they start to suffer from mental ill health. And mental health is fundamental to who we are as individuals and as humans, because we know because when we're feeling good about ourselves, when everything's working in our lives, and we can manage the stresses that naturally occur within our working lives, we can interact a lot more, we can have better relationships, we can offer support, we can accept support. And again, mental health is a positive aspect, and we can also help others get back to that state of wellness then. As I mentioned, work-related mental ill health usually focuses on around 3 areas. Work-related stress, that can then lead to work-related anxiety and work-related depression. And at times, work-related mental ill health can include work-related fatigue. Now, what can cause us to be mentally ill within the work environment? This can be due to stressful work conditions, negative work environment, and poor or ineffective policies, practices, and procedures. And one of the main causes of these conditions is having low control within the workplace. You can't decide how to do things, when to do things. And because of COVID-19, a lot of us have had that control given to us in one form, because we then have to decide how we can work within the work environment. What works for us then? Because organizations would not have had the time to actually support us in figuring out how to do the work within as we're working from home. But in other ways, there are a lot of things that have been out of our control. We didn't have a choice in working from home. It was, forced upon us. So we've had to manage the best way as we can. And mental ill health within the work environment is very, very a serious condition because the numbers more or less keep rising every year. So for the 2018 to 2019 figures, they show that over 500,000 workers admitted to suffering from work-related stress, anxiety, and depression. And there is a reality that this will actually increase by the end of this year because it is expected that a lot of workers' mental health is actually being affected by the COVID-19 virus. There is a huge expectation that the mental ill health prevalence rate will actually increase by the end of this year and as people go back into the work environment. So what can we focus on? How can we get the support that we need within the work environment? I'm going to focus on two areas. Workability, as Kim mentioned briefly, and healthy work environment. Now, there are other support systems, but again, these are two that actually focus on the individual as well as the organization at the organizational level, because we need the support systems at an individual level and we need the support systems at an organizational level. So how can we maintain workability? The first question we need to ask is, what is workability? And one definition is the balance between the characteristics and demands of the work and the health, capabilities, capacities, competencies, values, attitudes, and motivation of the worker. So it's basically, what can the individual do within the work environment? What are they capable of? What are the resources that they have in place? And as Jo mentioned, we always consider the conservation of resources. When can we use which resource and when? Which are we holding back to deal with another stressor or more aggressive stressor that's happening to us? So, workability is always about the resources that we have in place as individuals. Why is it important? Because it allows individuals to understand their own capabilities and their resources. So it also allows organizations to support workers in managing how best they can contribute to the workplace. So it should be part of a structured process to understand the resources that workers have and how that can help them in doing the work they need to do to support the organization and support colleagues. So basically, it asks the questions, what can you do? How well can you do it? How can I support you in doing it? What do you need to do it? What are the resources that God can provide for you as an organization to actually enhance the resources that you have at an individual level? And how can we support workability? That is ensuring that we have a good fit between the work characteristics and the worker's resources, which will equate to a high level of workability. Now, the work characteristics I will cover within the management standards later on. The main ones that are seen to actually impact on whether or not someone retains their mental health or becomes mentally ill, the six that the health and safety executive has identified: demands, control, support, relationships, growth, change. And these are very effective in actually saying what is working and what's not working within the work environment and how that's impacting on the employee. And workability also takes account of the work environment. Is it a pleasant work environment? Is it effective? Is it inclusive? What are the mental demands that are being made on us? And if the demands are too high and we don't have the resources in place, either at an individual level or an organization level, we will become ill. What are the mental resources that are available to us? Is the leadership good, effective, fair? Do the leaders support us? Do the leaders, make sure that the environment is working as it should? Are there any negative and positive spillover effects coming from work to home and vice versa? Because we are humans, we do have lives outside the workplace, and you do have that situation where we can't go into the workplace and leave everything at home at the door, and similarly we can't go home and then leave all the situation that occurred at that door. So there will always be something we bring in and out of either environment. That doesn't make it right or wrong. It just means that we're humans We can't shut off because we do think about these things and we do think, well, how could I have done that differently? I need to get some shopping done. There's always going to be some aspect that's actually going to cut across both dimensions. We have to think about our health, the healthy lifestyles, and there's been some anecdotal information saying that, you know, drug and alcohol abuse has increased over COVID-19. It may have done because that's a coping mechanism. That might be fine short term, but over the long term, it's not going to be very helpful. We also have to think about our competence levels. Do we have the competence to actually do the job that's required of us? Do we want to, because during COVID-19, some people would have been thrust into jobs that they're not used to doing. They might have difficulty understanding what to do, but they have to do it because that's what we've all been doing. We've all been pulling together. So again, reflecting, is this a competence that I want to improve on? Is it a competence that I think I don't need moving forward? And how do I get the competence I need to do the job that I actually want to do? Now, the Workability Index is free to use, and it is available in the public domain. And that's one of the better ways to actually measure workability right now. And it shows that, and also the Workability Index has been found to indicate likelihood of someone going off on sickness absence. And as Kim mentioned, you know, when does workability descend into work disability? And so the Workability Index can actually tell us, you know, this is what this individual is capable of doing. And that can actually stop the person from becoming disabled because of the work environment. And also, can we retain them as long as possible, or do we want them to retire early from the labour market? And we don't want that to happen because we need workers right now, especially coming out of COVID, probably going into a global recession. We need workers to function at their optimum in order to ensure that we recover from any recession that actually might be coming up right now. In terms of healthy work environment, so what is a healthy work environment? Now, there are a lot of difficulties in what this actually means. There's ways in which this can be understood. And there's no single model that is all encompassing about what constitutes a healthy work environment. And but there are various elements that should be within any environment for it to be considered healthy. And why do we need a healthy work environment? Because the business ethics of it actually helps with productivity and performance. The business case, again, is the right thing to do, and the legal requirement. We have to protect the workers within the workplaces. And a healthy work environment should focus on primary prevention, worker participation in decision making, the psychological safety of the workforce, leadership engagement that's based on core values, and having a supportive culture where trust, honesty, and fairness are all part of that culture. Now, this is one model that was developed by the World Health Organization, and it shows again the core components. You know, we have to look at the physical work environment, what is working, what is not working, health resources, how are we supporting the workforce, psychosocial work environment, again, the work characteristics, you know, demands, control, enterprise community involvement. We have to think about leadership, work involvement, and it's always key to get workers involved in every part of the decision making within the organization, because they feel included, they have voice. And if you don't include workers, there's the possibility that they wouldn't engage with those changes that are required within the work environment. You always have to think about ethics. It's the right thing to do, the values. We do this because we want to have a productive and healthy workforce. Of course, you have to think about mobilizing, prioritizing, planning, evaluating. You should always evaluate what's happening within the work environment so you can actually assess what's working, what's not working, and what is not working, how can you improve on it. Another model is one developed by the American Psychological Society. And again, as you see with this model, communication is key to everything that happens within the workplace. And again, that's an intervention that's not expensive, that's easy to ensure that this occurs. Again, you have to think about the work-life balance. Are employees managing work and life fairly well? The health and safety of the employees. Are you growing them? Are you developing them? Are you giving them the resources they need? Are you recognizing the efforts within the work environment? Are you involving them? And as with the WHO model, again, we see that worker involvement is essential to make sure that any workplace is considered healthy and worthwhile. And then that can lead to employee well-being, their health and safety is recognized, and also how effective the organization is at functioning and not, managing poor performance, low productivity. They're actually supporting the workers to actually be more effective in what they do. As we focus now on risk assessment, few people might not recognize that risk assessment should be done for health issues as well as for safety issues, because we might have the mindset that risk assessment is only in terms of the safety issues within an organization and making sure that risk is managed. If there's a huge hole in the floor, make sure that the floor is covered, make sure that slips and trips do not occur within the work environment. But we should also be doing risk assessment for the health aspects of the work environment. So how do we assess risk? Again, risk assessment is generic in terms of whether it's an injury or whether it's an illness. So for the safety aspect as well as the health aspect, we are identifying what is causing the injury or the illness. We are deciding how likely is it that someone could be harmed and how seriously. And then we have to take action to eliminate the risk or make it as low as possible. And then we have as the health and safety executive says, you have the ALARP standard, as low as reasonably practical, because some risks can never be eliminated or mitigated. We have to decide how much of the risk that we wish to accept and how best we can control it. And there are some times that we might not even be able to control the risk, but we have to be aware that this exists. We have to be aware of the hazards that actually contribute to the risk. Now, in the COVID-19 era, it's even more essential for us to assess the risk. We've had rapid change, we've had uncertainty, volatility, change from the normal working patterns, change in how relationships are maintained, change in how to access support. We've had an increase in demands, some increase in control, but we also have had many new things to control. So it has been continuous. But we need to assess risk to prevent them actually occurring or being harmful. We need to provide information to workers. We need to provide training to workers. We need to provide the organization with the process to eliminate the necessary measures. And we can do this most effectively when we assess what the risks are and how well we can manage them or eliminate them. And now the management standards is a risk assessment. And that's essential to note. It is a way of addressing the work stresses through a risk assessment process. And the agency's management standards approach consists of three areas. You have the management standards approach, which is the model that tells you that outlines exactly how every part of it should be conducted. We have the indicator tool, which is a 35-item questionnaire that actually asks you to assess the 6 areas that I mentioned before. And then we have the management standards, which are the 6 identified work characteristics that are themselves hazards. So the implementation of the management standards is risk assessment. The probability of suffering from work-related stress is the risk, and the management standards are the potential hazards. And some of you might have seen this before. You've got demands, which looks at your workload, work patterns, and the overall work environment. Control. I've mentioned control by quite a bit. How much say the person has in the way they do their work. Support. Where do we get support from? Colleagues, line management, the leaders. Relationships. Is it positive? Is it negative? Is conflict controlled? And is there a way to deal with unacceptable behavior? Role. Workers understand their role. Within the COVID-19 experience, roles have changed drastically. So some people might now not be quite aware of exactly what they're doing. They're doing it, and they're doing it because they have to do it. But they might be thinking, this is different from what I was doing 3 months ago. And is it going to be the same when I return to the work environment in a month's time, 6 weeks' time, 2 weeks' time? And change over the last 3 months has been constant. There's been a lot of upheaval. And how have organizations been managing this? For the most part, we think they've been managing it more or less fine because they've had to react quickly. But going back into the work environment, that is another change. And are they fully prepared to deal with the different change that, as Jo has outlined in the return to work piece, have the line managers been brought up to speed? And as she said, only 8% of managers were trained on adjustments. And I think quite a lot of organizations would have to do adjustments with employees going back into the workplace, the physical workplace. So are they prepared to do that? How is that change being managed? And again, if you look at a couple of the management standards in terms of demand, now the standard that organizations should be working to reduce the risk is that employees indicate that they're able to cope with the demands of their job. The demands are not too hectic. And there are systems in place to respond to any individual concerns. And the state to be achieved in this respect are: the organization provides employees with adequate and achievable demands, their skills and abilities match their job demands, and again, it's within the capabilities of the employees. And so we have to go back to the workability index. What are the capabilities of the employees? If the organization assesses management standards, and this comes up as a concern, they can use the workability index to say, okay, what can you do? How can we support you in doing it? And then any concerns employees have about the work environment are addressed. In terms of change, because I said change has been constant over the last few months, and it's not going to change for the next few months moving forward. Change is constant anyway, but this has made it a bit more volatile, a bit more uncertain. Now, the standard for the change standard is that employees indicate that the organization engages them frequently when undergoing an organizational change. Again, we're going back to involving the employees with what's happening within the organization. Get them involved, get them to, because in reality, an employee usually knows how best their job can be done. So you have to allow them the time to actually say that and advise you and support you in making the change. And what do we want to achieve from this? The organization needs to provide the employee with timely information. They understand what's going on, why it's going on, and how they can support the process. They consult with employees. Employees are aware of the probable impact of any changes to their jobs. And again, due to COVID-19, this was quite difficult to achieve because it was instant, asked of us, basically overnight, you need to work from home, you need to do this now. They're aware of timetables for change, and again, COVID-19 has made that very, very challenging, so that really has not happened. And then going back, and we've now been told we've got a 1 week to 2 week deadline to actually get people back into the workplace according to the type of industry in which they're working. Again, that's going to be challenging for organizations. And employees have access to relevant support systems during these changes. Hopefully organizations can manage that, but if not, you can focus at get support from line managers, and as Jo mentioned, get some support from buddies, have a trusted friend you can talk to, express your concerns and say, okay, these are my fears, this is what I need to do. And again, work that as ways, so let the friend, talk to you about what his or her concerns are. And again, this is the model itself, the management standards approach. Now, as you can see, it's a 5-step process. You identify the hazards, which are demands, control, support, relationships, role, and change. And you work through that 5 changes, plan it, evaluate, assess, prepare an action plan, and then you evaluate and you start all over again. But the one in the middle is to prepare the organization. That is essential, because when you're preparing the organization, you're getting the support from the senior management that say, yes, this is what we need to do, this is how we'll do it, I'm fully behind this. Once you have the senior management support, it's a lot easier to try to implement changes. And you also have to make sure you involve the workers. So you've got the top-down top-down support, you've got the bottom-up support as well. So it makes it a lot more easier to actually facilitate all the serious changes that are needed. And again, at an individual level, it is a bit challenging in terms of getting the organization to provide the support that you need and the resources that you need. There are various things you can do on your own. If you have a lot of work to do, a lot of demands being made upon you, assess what is feasible, what is not. You can negotiate what you need to do and how you need to do it. And that's always a possibility. Just because someone tells you to do 10 things in 5 minutes doesn't mean that you should be doing those 10. You can always negotiate and say, okay, what do you want done in the next 3 minutes? What do you not need done in the next 4 minutes? What do you need done in the next 1 minute? There's always room to negotiate as much as possible. If you've got low control, what can you control? What is meaningful in your job? How can you focus on those areas? You have to do everything else, yes, but you can always focus on those little things that is within your control that will make you feel better about yourself and what you're actually accomplishing within the work environment. If there are poor relationships within the workplace, again, build your personal networks inside and out of the work environment. And, always maintain a professional attitude towards those challenging any of the relationships that are existing within the work environment. In terms of support, request support assistance when needed. And that's essential because a lot of workers are hesitant about asking for support for one reason or another. We have to get a lot braver in saying, for me to do my job more effectively, I would need to get support in doing this. You've got an undefined role. Raise this with your line manager and work together to redefine the role. And as Jo mentioned, a lot of ill health and mental illness within the work environment can be a lot reduced because of the support of your line manager, because they're usually like more or less the first line of defense who are actually supporting you within the workplace to actually make sure that your job gets done as effectively as possible. For change management, what and how can you contribute? You might not know, but then you can ask the question, why is this change happening? How can I support it? What else can I be doing? So always try to get involved as much as possible. So that is me, and I think we are now open for questions.
Thanks very much, all of you, and a really fantastic presentation. Very kind of reassuring, actually, Roxane, about we can do what we can do and take every day as a time. I'm feeling calm on myself already, actually. It's rather nice. So I've got some questions here, and I'll just take them one by one and then put them to the different speakers. But thanks very much. It's a round of applause virtually to all our speakers. It's really excellent. We've got quite a lot of time for questions and answers, so do put them in the chat box. But the ones that we've got so far is one from Anne Mason to you, Kim, about management referrals conducted over the telephone and video links provide an excellent solution during COVID. Returning to face-to-face would be challenging, and what are your thoughts, please, about a new, not impossible, COVID revolution, echoing the back pain revolution, to which I know you're a passionate advocate. So I suppose this is about support to workplaces and how that might be different now with COVID and after COVID in terms of more remote assessment and using technology. What do you think, Kim? You need to unmute, yeah.
It's a really interesting question. Thank you, Anne. I don't know, I'm assuming that people are aware of the back pain revolution, but it was a term that was coined by Gordon Waddell, an orthopedic surgeon, back in the probably late 80s, early 90s. And that was essentially, he coined the phrase as to describe a movement away from a previous way of dealing with a health problem. There was a strong feeling that back pain should be treated with rest, which essentially gave all the wrong messages. And we gradually realized that that was, in fact, the wrong thing to do. And there needed to be a complete revolution that actually the best thing to do with common back pain is to stay active. So there's a complete shift, an upside down shift really to how back pain was going to be managed. And I'm trying to tie that into a COVID revolution. And I'm assuming you're thinking about the same sort of thing. Should we actually be doing things rather differently from before? Now, if you remember that graph that I showed at the beginning of my presentation, that's kind of, that actually, some of the data for that graph, I mean, it's a conceptual graph, but some of the data from that does actually come from back pain in the past and a realization that actually by using rest as a treatment, we increase disability. But it was turned out to be far more complicated than that. And the same thing is still true. A lot of my presentation was about existing health problems, not about COVID itself. And I think we've got to just remember that whatever we're going to do during this COVID period and whatever we're going to do afterwards, people are still going to experience common health problems as well as serious illness and injury. And we've got to, I think you're right, I think we've got a possibility here to rethink how we manage common health problems in the workplace. And the COVID experience could actually be a catalyst to make us rethink it and say, hang on, do we need to medicalize everything? Do we actually need a lot of heavy duty stuff for everybody who's got a particular problem? And the answer is, of course, we don't. But how do we get that message across? And perhaps it's just happening because people currently don't have access to the healthcare that they used to have. I still have my question, what are they doing? And I think there's a found experiment there to see just what people are doing and what effect it's having on their health. But going back to the idea of telephonic case management and online help for people, I think, yeah, we've got a nice way of looking at what happens when we're forced into a particular situation. One of the things that worries me a little bit is who's going to collect the data and who's going to synthesize it and make something of it. Well, I guess that's down to us. And I don't doubt there are people who are going to be looking at this. But I like the idea of COVID resolution.
Okay, thanks very much. Yeah, I mean, I think it's an opportunity to reboot things for the better, and that's well said. So this is a clinical one. I'm not sure it's going to be that easy to reply to from Azuma Noel Koro. Should someone who's tested positive for COVID-19 return to work after 7 days while they still have a cough, and even if the other symptoms appear to be subsiding? So this is about Public Health England's clinical guidance about 7 days of isolation and return to work, which so any comments from Jo? Feedback.
So I think that's from my slide. So that is the guidance that's on the gov.uk site and is also in the SOM guidance at the moment. I think different workplaces will be taking different strategies as well to assess symptoms on return. But the guidance is that if you have a cough but not the other symptoms, and particularly not temperature, then you're able to return.
Okay, thanks very much. So Pooja, this pandemic may make 70% or more struggle with mental health issues, but it's not possible to get them all at home, so for the better. The most common question at present from employees is, can you guarantee my safety at work if I return from manufacturing industry work? And although driving is more risk than return to work, at work industry with health and safety intervention. So it's just about risk perception, and it's probably safer to be at work distance than going to the shops, for example, and how you do that. I remember on a call on Return to Work last week, someone was talking about sort of 0 being no risk, 10 being probably sitting in a hospital ward with no PPE, 5 being the shops, and 2 to 3 being at home. So kind of talking about it in that kind of relatively straightforward way to employees. But any of the presenters, Kim, Roxane, Jo, how do you deal with someone who's a bit of a sort of purists on this and explain to them about what the nature of risk is.
Well, I think that...
Sorry, you go.
Thanks, Jo. I think it's also a health issue, mental health issue, because you have to feel safe going back into the work environment. So I think you have to ask the employer, what are the risk assessments that you're doing in terms of my mental health and also my safety. So I don't think it's just a safety issue, it's also a health issue, because you have to feel comfortable, supported, knowing that when you go into the work environment that you can leave in one piece at the end of the day and you don't suffer from any injury or illness. And it is both a safety issue and because employers have to think about how best to maintain physical distancing when people come back into the workplace. If you've got a small office, it's going to be very, very challenging. A lot of offices have moved to hot desking, have moved to putting a lot of desks very close together. And that's going to be quite challenging to actually adjust, because they've spent a lot of money over the last 5-6 years, reducing office space, reducing, people having their own offices, and putting everybody together as much as possible. And also within factories, again, the space has gone to make everything a bit more compact, a bit more, constrained. And now they are having to think differently about, we need space now. We need those wide spaces that we had to walk and interact a lot more safely. So it is going to be a challenge, but I think workers have to keep asking those questions, because as we know the virus, we can't keep close to someone until we know that they're safe, until we know we're not passing it on inadvertently. So I think it is important.
Hi, yes, absolutely. I think that's really important. And one thing I think we also need to do is to ask them what their concerns are. So in terms of guaranteeing their safety, all we can do is explain these are the steps that we're taking. Are there any other concerns that you have, given what you know about your job? I think particularly talking to small businesses recently, I've realised small business owners particularly feel that they have to have all the answers and make all those provisions, when actually they may not be in the best position to know what the ins and outs of the day-to-day tasks are. And so I think there's nothing wrong with going back to your employee and saying, I understand that you're concerned about your safety. What would make you feel safe? And how can we work together to achieve that? And so it's much more of an open consideration. And layering on top of that, when we're working with people with mental health, one of the things that we try and shape up front is our objective is to get you back to work in a safe and productive way, because the longer that you're off work, the harder it's going to be, and the more likely it is that you're going to struggle with that return and may not return. So I think encouraging them to realise that work is a good outcome for them is something we can put up front and centre as well.
Okay, great answer. So, Kim Burton, imagine you are Boris Johnson and you're doing a press conference. Question, until now we've been using government guidance in our practice. In view of recent media information about people's interpretation of the guidance, how do we defend our advice to employees and employers, please? I think I've done it coming as well.
Why have I got this one? Okay. We've got a problem, haven't we? I think one of the problems, government has a problem, sorry. We've got a problem because we've got a government that's dithering around. And my guess is that it's dithering because it's playing politics rather than health or return to work. The guidance isn't terribly clear on lots of things, and it keeps shifting. And to a certain extent, it's bound to change because the circumstances are changing. But there doesn't seem to be sufficient clarity for people to get their heads around what it is that they can do, should do, and for that matter, should not do. So accepting uncertainty, if you like, is going to continue to be there. How are you going to defend your advice to employees and employers? I'm assuming the question means that the advice is going to be different from what government's saying at any given moment. And of course, it can be, because you're dealing with a specific situation with your company and your workers. The best advice I can give really is to go back to the science. Government says it's following the science, but I'm not sure that it is. And what you've got in front of you from, not from our presentations necessarily, but from SOM and VRA and BPS, you've got some well-considered bits of guidance that have been put together by a lot of people, many of them experts in their field, and coming to a consensus about what is best to do under the circumstances. So I'd revert back to the groups that are offering help to the very people that you're wanting to
help. Kim Burton for Prime Minister, that's what I say. Andrew Dixon was asked, is there evidence of positive effects on mental health from the epidemic? I now have a few psychological referrals and 2 individuals with PTSD, one of whom was hospitalised with COVID, have become almost fully well with no intervention. We know from World War II that psychological resilience was greatest in the most bombed cities. Fred's study of occupational health at the peak of the Blitz and facing invasions around a nation of gloriously happy people. So, I mean, I know this was kind of covered by Jo and Roxane about the positive side, but I wonder whether either Jo or Roxane want to talk about the evidence and positive effects.
So I'm not aware of research that's emerging quite yet, although I know there are a number of studies that are tracking people over time having had COVID, and particularly those who have been in ICU, so it'll be interesting to see what that says. There's some great work by Neil Greenberg at King's that has looked at the role of PTSD and interventions needed, and found that in many cases people will find that they go on to become fully well with no intervention. I think from some of the work that we've seen and conducted with people with cancer and other life-changing diagnoses is that for many people there is this re-evaluation of values and goals, and that in itself can then link to changes in work focus and life focus, and potentially this idea of developing a glorious happy people that you mentioned there. I think the other thing that is also interesting to think about is how when we're thinking about that shift in gosh, I'm sorry, I've lost my chain of thought. Thinking about the support that we have, that we need. Often when we look at people who have been through crisis times, so whether that's coming through an earthquake, other big events, one of the things that we do see is it's the very, very basics around communication, support, managing workload and so on that become absolutely vital, rather than necessarily the event itself. And so offering those people who are going through this experience with the very basics of good work and good return, I think becomes even more important.
Thanks very much. Just for your future presentation, Kim, I know I like your sort of Blondie sort of music references. I just can't think who did Shiny Happy People, but that's something you could add in. There's no other questions. I think I might just leave it for the presenters if they've got any final words. And particularly you can see those references from the SOM on Return to Work, VRA, I've got their Return to Work Toolkit, British Psychological Society, also CIPD, I've got some useful resources, and Kim, Jo and Roxane are there for you to email directly. There's a question coming from Pam Freighter. Home-based working, several cases where there's significant mental health risks and also workplace visits. Individuals may have had or noticed suicidal thoughts, prefer them to be in the workplace. Situations vary a lot, but there are any comments on risk assessments and risk balance in home working? That's a great question. Thanks, Pam. Jo or Roxane, the person? So maybe Roxane, Jo, just to follow up.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Pam. Yeah, there are risks with working at home, and actually, if you're working at home on a temporary basis, you more or less can get away with it according to the agency guidelines, but if it's a more permanent situation, your employer should do a full risk assessment, especially with respect to your display screen equipment, to make sure that you're working as healthily as possible and that you're not, you're doing, you're sitting while the arms are flat, your wrists are not tilting. So I think there are but I'm not so sure that having suicidal thoughts is due to them working at home, because that can occur regardless of where they work. So they might have had an underlying health issue, I'm not sure. But I think as long as they get the support, whether they were working within a physical work environment, was the central part, not the fact to, focus on the home environment, because a lot of people found it quite beneficial to be working at home because it's helping them to manage it a lot better. So there are risks wherever you work, but I think it's about getting your employer to make sure that the risk assessments have been done and are being assessed periodically to make sure that nothing untoward is going with the person. Again, it's keeping in touch, whether it's the line manager or another colleague within the workplace, keeping in touch, making sure that everyone has the resources that they need and not being ignored, not getting caught up in the isolation and loneliness that can easily happen. And so also making sure it's not too frequent, but giving them the space, but also making sure them know that you're there for them, that they are there to support you. So I think if we focus on getting the support system in place rather than trying to focus on whether or not one situation is actually increasing what's happening, as long as the support systems are in place, then a lot of this should actually be reduced. So, do you have anything else to add, Jo?
I think those are really important points in terms of the communication to identify those people who are most at risk, and also the support in place for all, because you may not be aware of who is at risk. But I think one of the other things that this brings is how do we plan and prioritise our return? And I know a number of offices and workplaces are thinking about how they identify who's going to return when, and I think that there could be a really good opportunity here to consult with employees and identify who is it that's going to benefit from the day-to-day contact and the routine of the workplace, and then on the other side, who would benefit most from staying at home for a prolonged period of time, so that they can better manage other commitments. And so it gives us a unique opportunity to provide those individualized support processes for individuals, I think.
Okay. Any further questions or comments? Kim, you're going to say something?
Well, I was just going to follow on from Jo there. That I think the point you make, Jo, it's absolutely bang on, and following on from Roxane as well. There is something in the SOM guidance and in general guidance about this whole return to work after COVID business, and that is that employers should be making a plan of action. And not it's partly on an individual basis, of course it is, but there should be an overarching plan from every employer, big and small, as to how they're going to handle these issues and have the right sort of communication systems in place so that they can deal with the individual issues, such as the one from Pam's question. And so I think we're kind of covering a lot of the ground in the guidance that's available, and that to me is quite reassuring, actually.
Okay, well, I've got another teleconference at 2, so rather selfishly, I'm going to wrap it up 5 minutes earlier so I can have a cup of tea. But it's certainly been worth having this time. If I know 2 hours a slot is a long one, I hope you've had something to munch over lunchtime, everyone. But we've had over 100 attendees. I think it's been really valuable. I'd like to particularly thank Jo, Kim, and Roxane, also Nick for hosting as usually so professionally. If you've got further questions, do get in contact with us. But otherwise, enjoy the sun every day. What a time, Roxane. You can be my personal counsellor. And thank you very much for joining. Have a good rest of the day. Cheers. Bye.